Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. The local time is 8:46 in the morning, Pacific time, on Friday, September 20th, 2024. It is still a quiet campus here at Central Washington University. We are on the quarter system, and our first day of class is not until this coming Wednesday of next week. So the dorms are now full of brand new freshmen, and there's a few more bodies around campus, but it's still pretty darn quiet. So we're taking advantage of this and chatting with this ongoing Idaho series. If you're watching this in replay, you can skip ahead to 15 minutes from now, probably, something like that, to the beginning of the program, but otherwise, are we doing okay? How are you doing? This iPad is listening to me with Siri. We don't want that. Hang on. Where are you viewing from today? I just upgraded to OS whatever, and so I'm probably going to have a few surprises here this morning. Oh, my Lord. Hang on, Patrick. Why is this window like this? Where's the live chat? Oh, boy. Okay. There it is. Wow. We have more than 100 early birds. Thank you for the 5x5 reports. I'm very confident with this system now, thanks to Nat the Wonder Boy, who set me up. What was that? Last December, maybe, when I had a huge meltdown with technology? I think so. Sharon from Malaga. Good morning. Garrett, the Dutch night owl. Why do I always stumble on that, Garrett? That used to roll right off my tongue. You're the night owl. Garrett, the Dutch night owl. Night owl. From the Netherlands. Hello, Garrett. Vicky's from Marysville, Washington. Bremerton, Washington. Tigard, Oregon. John is in Spokane Valley, Washington. Dallas, Oregon. Bergen, Norway. Hello. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Tempe, Arizona. Corvallis, Oregon. Pike Creek, Delaware. That seems like a new place for us. Special welcome to you. University Place, Washington. University of Idaho, Parma Research and Extension Facility. No big deal. Sweden. Trim, Ireland. Hello, Michael and family. Portland, Oregon. Rishikesh, India. That's Sankalp. Haven't seen you in a while. Thank you. What time is it there today? Or this evening or tomorrow, for all I know. Sankalp, can you give us a time of day for you, please? Excuse me, bacon and eggs. Hello. The chicken capital of the world. Petaluma, California. Vienna, Virginia. Montana. Heart emoji. Heart emoji coming back at you. Colville, Washington. Richland, Washington. I heard by email from Stephen Johnston, who says, it's just like Romper Room. Stephen's my vintage. It's just like Romper Room. I see Rachel. I see Nancy. I see Slacker Z. I see Dave O. I see Glenn Geiger. I see Bobby. What was her name? Who was that woman who did Romper Room? Where was she? Was that PBS? What? I'm 62. If you're my vintage, you remember watching Romper Room. Was there even like a magnifying glass or something like that? But she's like looking right into your eyes as a little kid. You're like, hi. Can't remember her name. Chino Hills, California. Had a little extra coffee this morning, if you can't tell. Sean says it was filmed in Tacoma. Is that true? The Romper Room program came from Tacoma, Washington? Okay, now I'm officially interested. Maybe I do need Siri. Siri, where did Romper Room originate? Shit never works, by the way. My kids roll their eyes anytime I talk into my phone. They're like, stop it. Where are you viewing from? Let's do a few more. Still got a few minutes, and then I need to get serious about connecting with our guest, Vic Camp from San Diego State University. And by the way, let's just show you before we get rolling that if you go to nickzentner.com, this morning I posted 2 of Vic's papers for our Idaho miniseries. I don't know, this may be the last Idaho show, I'm not sure. Long Lived Yellowstone, a 2021 paper by Vic Camp, and Farallon rollback paper by Vic Camp 2017. So there's much more work that Vic Camp has done, but those are the two papers that will be pertinent to our discussion today. There's the Zoom window. There's the shelf cam. Yeah, it's like 58 degrees Fahrenheit on a Friday morning, like 20-mile-an-hour winds. I love it personally. Not everybody loves it. We have an idling garbage truck outside, which drives me absolutely nuts every morning. So as soon as he gets off of his phone and goes away, I'll open my window again. Too much information. Sitting with an idling garbage truck scrolling through Instagram every morning for 15 minutes. And that's here. And then he goes on to the next building, probably does the same thing. I said too much. Prince Edward Island, Canada. Maybe good afternoon to you by now. That's kind of fun. Thank you. Sandpoint, Idaho. Hi, Ken. Miss Lewis. That was her name? I don't remember that. Miss Lewis, Romper Room. I will enjoy watching the replay and seeing all these comments. Now we're talking about Sherry Lewis and Lamb Chop. I remember that. I never liked that show. That show creeped me out, actually. What was that? Those puppets? Lamb Chop, but somebody else? It was the crocodile or whoever that was. It's like, no thanks. Nixon, Walla Walla, Washington, everybody. Webb Lake, Wisconsin. Kansas City, Missouri. Chelmsford, England. It's almost 5 p.m. in Chelmsford. Thank you, Wes. 21 degrees C. I'm not bright enough to convert that for my own brain. All sorts of romper room talk now. This is fun. Seriously dating myself, but there's some older folks here. But you know what? I don't know. I'm meeting more and more people in the flesh, and it's not just us old people. There's a lot of people in their 50s, in their 40s, in their 30s, in their 20s watching these things. It feels kind of new that the demographics are expanding younger. I like it, if that's real, but it sure seems like it just from the variety of people I've been seeing. I was up at Rainier Park yesterday with Hannah Shamloo and Jordan Carey, and we were visiting with all sorts of folks who wanted to chat with us, both at Sunrise and Paradise. Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. Oh, God. No, thank you. No, thank you. I got to get off that mentally. I'm going to be creeped out the whole morning. Vic's a nice guy. He will get me back in the zone. Let's do a few more. Lincoln City, Oregon. Half Moon Bay, California. Fairfield, California. Los Angeles, California. Highland, Michigan. Nanaimo, British Columbia. Elk, Washington. Where's Elk? Wild Lilac? Where's Elk, Washington? Never heard of it. Oegstgeest, the Netherlands. Hello, Hans. Now we're talking ages. All right, yeah, we get it. A bunch of you are old. Yeah, I am too. Got it. Oh, but I'm not that old? Right, okay. Yeah, all right. Witty repartee. That's French. Okay. Parkersburg, West Virginia. Cornwall, UK. That's London Liz. Christmas Valley, Oregon. La Grande, Oregon. Now we get a bunch of Oregon people. I think we will be in Oregon a fair amount today. Much to my chagrin. Just kidding, but I don't know much. Finland, hello. North of Spokane. Oh, that's where Elk, Washington is. Thank you. Tempe, Arizona. Sonora, Arkansas. Half Moon Bay. I've already got you, Bob, or unless there's another Half Moon Bay. Oh, no, that's Half Moon Bay, British Columbia. Oh, is there a Half Moon Bay, California, and a Half Moon Bay, British Columbia? Thank you for being here. I'm going to give you I'll give you a shelf cam, and I will struggle to get connected with Vic by Zoom, and we will start our program in 5 minutes. Thank you so much for being here live on a Friday morning. We have more than 300. Doesn't seem to matter what the day or the time is. A bunch of you show up, and I am grateful to you. Having a live audience really helps. And just for the record, I asked Vic Do you want to do a live stream or you want to do a recorded thing? We can do either one, whatever you're more comfortable with. He says, let's go live. I want to answer a bunch of people's questions or something like that. So that's what we're doing. Thanks. We'll start in 5 minutes. Okay. Yep. Zoom window. Invite a guest. Email. Default email. Vic Camp. San Diego State University. And away that goes. Hot mic. Hot mic. Vic, good morning. How are you? I hear you just great. Yeah, you sound really good. How about my sound on your end? Is it okay? Okay, nice. And visual stuff as well. Looks like we're doing great there. The headphones are much appreciated. I think it's helpful to have that just for insurance, I guess, whatever. But you don't have a second screen going with some other interference. It sounds like it's just us here on Zoom, right? Okay, good. Okay, good. Well, yeah, we got to really make sure that the audio is just right. But if it works for you, that's wonderful. And an advantage of Zoom is that most everybody's comfortable at this point. You know, after the past few years of having Zoom meetings and sharing screens and things. So I assume you'll be comfortable that way as well. Thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it. It was probably a mad scramble to get ready for this weekend. Are you heading to GSA? Yeah, okay. Well, the timings may be weird for you, but I appreciate you squeezing us in for sure. Thank you. Are you really? Okay, well, yeah, let's touch on that a little bit in a second, if you don't mind. I think I'm ready to get rolling. Are you okay? Are you comfortable? Any questions you have about anything for us here before we start? Okay. That's an advantage. Thank you for watching some of those. Yes, that's part of the reason to have you watch some of those. You get a sense of what I'm up to, and there's no gotcha journalism here. This is just following our leads and going back and forth as much as we can. So that's wonderful. Okay, well they cannot hear you so far, but they're about to hear you in about. So give me 5 minutes. I'll set the stage for us, and then we'll just go. Okay, Vic. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's Friday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific time in late September. And here we are almost 2 months now after the beginning of what is now the Idaho miniseries, and this is episode number 11. So my first message, as I've been saying recently, is if you really want to get the most out of these Idaho episodes, you need to watch them in order. So I think we will be referring to past appearances. And our special guest today, Vic Camp from San Diego State University, has been watching these and maybe has some thoughts specifically, or maybe I'll lead in that direction to get some reaction about some past episodes. But we do have some slides from Vic. We have a bunch of new thoughts from Vic Camp's work, and I'm wanting to learn from him directly along with you. And Vic requested this be a live stream because he does want to have a chance to answer some of your questions directly. So that is part of the live stream experience, and that's coming. But give you a few more minutes if you would. I want to show something on the document camera to set up our discussion, and I just want to use my own teaching here at Central Washington University to get us into that, and how I have kind of evolved in my thinking about teaching the Yellowstone Hot Spot, and it's a direct result of the work of Vic and others. So, document camera, here's how I do it very quickly and how I have been doing it. So, I went to graduate school in Pocatello. I did a master's thesis on the eastern Snake River Plain. I was mapping normal faults in the High C volcanic field, trying to figure out the timing of the basin and range extension in eastern Idaho, intersecting with the subsidence of the eastern Snake River Plain as the Yellowstone Hot Spot moves off to Wyoming. And I think everybody knows it's a drifting North American plate over a stationary Yellowstone mantle plume. So as I've been teaching, so in other words, I was comfortable with that discussion. And so all through the 1990s and the 2000s, here's what I would do with my Geology 101 classes. There's a caldera in Yellowstone National Park. The Yellowstone mantle plume is underneath Yellowstone Park. Great. And if we go back in time, Vic, I'm just drawing a map on the Pacific Northwest and drawing the age progression across southern Idaho. And by the time we get to 17 million years ago in northern Nevada, we have the initiation of this beautiful eastern Snake River Plain story, and these calderas, each of those circles are buried calderas in pink underneath the potato fields of southern Idaho. And it's only the visible Yellowstone caldera that's red here that's a true topographic rim that you can see. And every quarter for 2 decades, when I would draw that on the chalkboard, students' hands would go up and say, why 17 million years ago? Why did this thing start? Why was there I think I was using the phrase birth of the Yellowstone Hot Spot. And they're like, what is the story? Why would this thing just start in the middle of the desert? And I would literally put question marks on the map like I'm doing right now. And I say, well, I don't know. At some point, maybe somebody will be able to extend that story earlier. And our guest has done that, along with Ray Wells and many others. And once upon a time, the Yellowstone mantle plume was out in the Pacific Basin, burning a hole in an ocean plate originally, and then started burning a hole in the North American plate. And so it's this gap here between northern Nevada and the Pacific Basin, a gap in space and a gap in time that will be the main focus, at least to start with our discussion with Vic Camp. Let's bring him on. Let's go from there. There he is. Vic, how are you this morning? Are you in San Diego this morning?
I'm good. San Diego's always nice. Good weather.
And you're about to head to the Geological Society of America annual meeting. It seems a little early this year. Where is the meeting being held this year?
Well, it's not a long trip for me. It's in Anaheim, so
yeah,
in the LA area. So
okay. Have you heard why it's so early? Is it sometimes this early? Late September seems early for that meeting.
It is a little bit early. Yeah. Not sure why.
Okay, well, hey, works for you. And will you be presenting or giving a poster or a talk at the meeting next week?
I'm just going to relax at this meeting, so no
Good.
poster, no talk for me.
Okay. And I was surprised when we were talking before we started that you are still teaching. When did you start teaching at SDSU, and why are you still teaching?
Actually, I spent 10 years away from the U.S., and then when I came back, I got a position at San Diego State, never left.
Nice.
So I'm officially retired.
Okay.
I began in 1993, but I'm still back teaching.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for your time this morning before you head off to the meeting. When did you start mapping or doing geological work in the Pacific Northwest with rocks that are somehow tied to the mantle plume? Does it go back earlier than the early 90s?
It actually does. It goes back to Washington State University. That's where I got my PhD, and I started mapping along with other graduate students that are now pretty well known in the CRBs, Steve Rydell, Marty Ross, and myself. And we were all students under Peter Hooper. And at the same time, Don Swanson, the USGS folks, got involved with mapping, so that began it all.
So the focus was on the CRBs back then, and were people talking about the Yellowstone Hot Spot tied to those CRBs back then in the 80s?
Absolutely not.
Right.
The interesting thing is that all the focus was in the stratigraphy, and there was very little thought about Genesis. So.
Well, who better to ask than you? And maybe we'll just do this a little bit more verbally, and then we'll go to some of your slides. Who started making the connection between the flood basalts, known as the Columbia River basalts, and the Yellowstone story? And then the other part, the other jump in my mind, is then getting older to the Yellowstone Hot Spot out in the water. Let's do both of those. Who was making the first connection between Yellowstone Hot Spot and the flood basalts? Was it you that was first doing that?
No, it's a good question. I mean, I would have to say Peter Hooper, but it wasn't a real jump, and it was all driven by the stratigraphy, which is the way it should work. We get the stratigraphy first. We finally realized, the ages are coming out with a very abrupt pulse of activity, and then we started to think, well, how could that happen? We know mantle plumes, from other flood basalt provinces, react that way. So that's where it began.
Well, I'll show you what I was just drawing for the home crowd. And yes, that 17 million year beginning of the hotspot story is roughly the beginning of the stratigraphy you're talking about, more or less. And so were you also teaching the birth of the Yellowstone hotspot in northern Nevada for a decade or more?
So what the problem with the plume is that the main area of eruption was the Chief Joseph Dike Swarm, which is in northeastern Oregon.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is your hotspot tract doesn't match up with that.
Right.
Right. So that's a big jump. It's about 300-400 kilometers or something like that. So that was an argument against the mantle plume. What happened is after I came back from overseas that I mentioned, I got a hold of Peter Hooper because I wanted to get involved again in the CRBs. And he suggested working in southeastern Oregon. So then I called up my good buddy Marty Ross, who's been my field project buddy for many, many years, and we started mapping in the Malheur Gorge area of Oregon. And then we made a connection between Steen's basalts and actually added it to the lower part of the stratigraphy.
Oh, right.
Right, and then that brought us down in terms of a continuous stratigraphy all the way at the beginning of where the hotspot is today.
So you were instrumental in connecting those things by getting those Steen's units lumped into the story, and so we're filling a gap there, essentially, geographically between northeastern Oregon, where the CRB fissures were known, and that McDermott caldera. So that Steen's was an important way to connect both spatially and temporally. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I first caught wind of that, maybe the 2009 Portland meeting. I seem to remember being very excited by your talk down there and those beautiful maps that you had. For me personally, that was a big moment to connect those things together. So do I have the chronology about right? So okay, now I'm getting excited. So let's pick that year, if you don't mind. 2009, we're making that connection using the Steens basalts. We're tying the CRBs with the Yellowstone Hot Spot. At that time in the story, 2009, was anybody talking about the hot spot with a much longer life and going out to the Silesia story for you, or was anybody making that argument back then, 15 years ago?
So we actually made that connections in a publication in 2004. But the way science works, sometimes it takes a while, to get things moving. And at that point, we suggested, the Yellowstone plume, as others had, before us.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people did not believe in plumes. And if as you recall, this was sort of the time where there was motion, this movement, if you will.
Yeah.
Where people really started to scrutinize the idea of mantle plumes.
Right. Where are we now with that? I was trying to get Karen to talk more about that. She seemed kind of reluctant, like the debates about mantle plumes in general. It did feel like everybody it wasn't a cool idea for a while to even be into mantle plumes at all. Aren't you the guy that runs mantleplumes.org?
No.
No?
No, I don't run that. In fact, I have contributed to it, but
Okay.
it is actually it should be anti-mantleplumes.org because there's more people on that site that are actually, well, I would say plume skeptics, as opposed to anti-plumes. But
Wow.
yeah.
Well, this is maybe a huge curveball, but can you comment on general thoughts on mantle plumes, pro and con, over the course of your career, and where do you stand? You must like the idea of a mantle plume if you're publishing on it.
Well, I do like the idea. In fact, I think it's pretty well established now. I mean, here, in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
By most people. I mean, there's still some people who, correctly point out the discrepancies, but the evidence is pretty overwhelming on a lot of different ways. But I think the whole movement, if you will, of skepticism on mantle plumes was a real positive thing, and has been, because it really made people step back, and think. So
Good.
It's been a good thing.
So 2004, you're publishing for the first time on. Did you tie Silesia back then in 2004 to the Yellowstone Hot Spot, or you just were arguing in general for a longer-lived hot spot?
I was not. In fact, I was aware of Bob Duncan's position because he wrote a very nice paper. I don't know, I can't remember the date, but at
early
least
80s, I think.
years.
Yeah.
Early 80s.
Yeah.
82 maybe, something like that.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I wasn't really in favor of that idea, and it took me a while to see the possibilities, and of course now I am. So particularly after Ray Wales's and the others' paper in 2014.
Okay, one more verbal thing, and then let's go to a few slides to just revisit some of this with some of your beautiful imagery. So, what swayed you? Was it collaborating with Wells and others who had very strong opinions, or are you a geochemist first and foremost, and you finally saw enough signatures that made you see the connection that has to be a Yellowstone hotspot out there in the water? Or what got you thinking seriously about that beyond 2004?
It was probably a combination of those.
Okay.
I knew Doug Pyle, who worked out in that area with Bob Duncan, and we had some good conversations on chemistry, which seemed pretty reasonable to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the geology became known, and then people working on the seafloor, plate motion studies, are putting things together, and it all kind of fit together in my mind very, very nicely.
Nice. How about one more before we go to the slides? You know that I've been struggling in the last struggles meant to be positive. I've been thinking hard and listening hard about different opinions about where to place Silesia with a Yellowstone hot spot beneath it out in the water? Are we at a spreading ridge? Are we underneath the Farallon? Are we underneath the Kula? I should know this, but I don't. Maybe I don't remember some key maps from those two papers that are at my website from you. Do you like that hot spot, Yellowstone, 56 million years ago, straddling two plates at a spreading ridge?
I think if there's a true connection with Yakutat, I don't see any other way around it. It would have to be on or very close to it.
And now this is new ground for me, but I'll just play with you here a little bit if you don't mind. So, okay, so we've got this thing straddling two plates, maybe Resurrection to the north and Farallon to the south. I don't know if you're agnostic on what plate goes to the north. You don't even have to comment if you want. I know you want the Farallon to the south of that spreading ridge, correct?
Yep.
Okay. But I'm having a hard time. Is Silesia moving towards North America, or is Silesia sitting out there on that stationary plume and the only thing moving is North America before this mantle plume is slipping beneath North America? Can we try it verbally before we look at your images? How do you visualize that key between 56 million years ago and 42 when the thing slips under North America?
It's a good question. I kind of see it maybe through vector analysis.
Okay.
Because you have ridge moving away, the plates moving away from the ridge. But at the same time, you have the North American plate moving towards the ridge at an angle, I assume. So I think maybe both are happening.
The spreading ridge is moving away from North America?
No, the plates are moving away from the ridge, and North America is moving toward the ridge. I think that in the first diagram I have, it's from Ray's Wells et al. Paper. I think that kind of shows what I'm talking about. So
I think it's time. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, this is great. You are easy to talk to, Vic. It's like we've been doing this a million times. So this is our first, but your vibe is so great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you take your time getting shared there, and it looks like we got more than 500 folks watching live, including Spreading Ridge John Nash, who has got his questions ready to go, I'm sure. Oh, John even doesn't have a question. He just says it's both. Okay, good.
Let's see now.
Yeah, you're finding a share button is down at the bottom of your screen in the middle, probably, in your Zoom window.
Okay, let me go back to that.
Okay.
I see the share, but I have to share before I start it, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Let's see here.
Take your time. There you go.
Okay.
Excellent. And it might be better to go to the full screen. We can see your screen, but we can see all your slides on the left as well.
Should be up now.
Now it is. Yes. Thank you. Please, proceed, Vic. Thanks.
So this is from the Wells et al. Paper, and I guess the two images on the left-hand side are at 55 MA and at 50 MA, so you can see the change taking place. So it's the Kula plate to the north. I assume maybe the Resurrection plate. This is all honestly a mystery to me. So,
yep.
But you can see the position of the Yakutat and also Silesia here in the 55 MA.
Good.
And then as time goes by, we go to the next image over here when Silesia is starting to accrete to North America. And one thing I want to point out is, according to this reconstruction, is Silesia is down here, overlapping the border of Northern California and Oregon.
Right.
And presumed estimates on where the Yellowstone Hot Spot are in these circles right through here. And only one of these is actually right on the ridge. So I'm not quite sure the detail of those. But from my perspective, the fact that those three are in the general vicinity it was encouraging because this is where we ended up starting the plume underneath the North American plate once it entered the trench here in northern California.
Well, let me interject for just a sec. You keep going with the slides, but viewers, it might be a surprise to you that this map is showing the majority of Seleucia adding to Oregon and even Northern California, and the Yellowstone mantle plume is out in the water, but it's heading towards the Oregon-California line. We've been, Vic, I think we've been so Washington-centric, we visualize everything slamming us here at our latitude, but is the simple answer to why we're accreting, or why this story is happening so far south, even though many of the rocks are in Washington now, it's a clockwise rotation story, isn't it, after the accretion? Would that be the simplest way to say it, Vic?
That's right. That's exactly right. And that rotation has a much greater effect on coastal areas than it would more inland areas.
Great. Please proceed. This is wonderful.
Okay. Well, that actually, you gave us a good segue here to the next slide.
There we go.
So that's good. So here you can see Seleucia has now moved up, a few hundred kilometers to the north. The polar rotation here, estimated by McCaffrey et al., is generally in this area right in here, pretty close to the tri-state area, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Somewhere in there. So so that explains that nicely. So if we want to go back and reconstruct this in time, of course, we have to move Seleucia back to where it was, shortly after its accretion, which would have been about 50 million years ago.
Couple questions, if you don't mind, on that slide.
Yes.
Can I say in the future, if I do a program on this, that none of Seleucia was in Washington originally? Like there's a bunch of Seleucia. Is that can we be that bold?
I hate to be that categorical. So I think you need to get Ray Wells here to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I don't want to say something that's kind of against the data.
I got you. How about what's with the two white dotted lines across Idaho and Oregon? What's the difference between those two lines?
So that's a good question. These are potential estimates on where the Yellowstone Hot Spot would be based on, in this case, two separate plate motion studies.
I see.
And these are actually sort of end member studies of other tracks. That would be between the two.
Okay. Well, thank you for your patience. I know these aren't even your figures, and I'm grilling you on them. So yeah, I'm sure we're going to get to some of your work here in just a bit. Please proceed.
Yeah, and I do want to say that anybody that's interested in this topic should really read the Wells et al. Paper, because it's a very good paper and enlightening, to the Eocene of this part of the world. So
it's a major paper. Yeah, it's a bit of a masterpiece right at the end of his career, it seemed like. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, here's some Vic stuff. Got it. All right, let's sink our teeth in.
So again, it's a good segue, because after reading the Wells et al. Paper, that excited me, and this kind of turned my thoughts to Seleucia when I'd largely ignored it for many, many years. Because since Marty and I had done all this work here in southeastern Oregon, we had our own interpretations of the geology out here and how it may or may not fit into to the hotspot track.
Interesting. Yeah.
In here, and so after giving this some thought, I talked to Ray, and we got together and thought about producing this paper, kind of connecting ideas that we had on where the track is most likely to be, and how it could explain the North American track as opposed to the oceanic track. So in this diagram, we sort of put that together. We rotated Seleucia back to its original about 45 million years ago.
Mm-hmm.
As far as Ray thought he could bring it all the way back. He wouldn't go any farther south than about here.
Huh.
And you'll notice these two purple triangles down here at 40.5 MA. Well, these are estimated locations from McCory and Wilson in 2013, based on variations in the Pacific and Atlantic hotspot reference frames.
Oh, interesting.
So, and where we began it, based on the plate motion studies of Matthews et al., this is the most recent study in 2017, is about right in here. So I mentioned this because these are more or less the same age, and it gives you some idea of, the general, the general area, based on, different studies and different plate motion and hotspot reference frames. So, if we're looking at any errors, it would likely be somewhere, in this region. So this is the track that we suggested at 10 million year intervals, marked by the red dots as you see here.
Mm-hmm.
And we lined that up with the geology that's well known in the Snake River Plain, and bringing it down into the geology of McDermott caldera and the high rock caldera complex over here. And we also spent some time looking at the Oligocene rocks that underlie the Steens. And this is where the chemistry comes in a bit, because we noticed that there was a pretty significant, well, I wouldn't say so, it's actually a subtle change, but relevant change in some of these rocks that have a signature of Adachite. And they all lined up along a fairly consistent interval right here, with a north-northeast trend, which is also consistent with the hotspot trend. And Adachites have they're a little bit controversial, but these are rocks that were first found at Adak Island in Alaska. Mm-hmm. And the original definition is that they have a signature that would indicate melting of deep oceanic crust. But there are other ways to produce Adachites, and one of those is through melting of thickened continental crust.
Mm-hmm.
We eliminated that because the oceanic terrains here, the accreted terrains that form the basement, are relatively thin crust, so not really thick enough for significant melting to produce Adachite. So our interpretation is this is most likely Adachite generated from melting of slab, oceanic slab of the Farallon plate, indicating perhaps the slab was breaking up, or at least there was enough thermal energy to start melting the oceanic crust.
Okay,
which of course would relate to the hotspot track.
Yes, thank you. Okay, can I hold you up for just a sec, Vic? And
sure.
It's your choice what you're most comfortable with. We can just go back and forth verbally for a few minutes right now in this format, or if you're comfortable enough to stop your share momentarily and have our two heads on screen, we can try that. But if you don't want to mess with that, we can just keep the slides going. Hey, there you go. Nice. All right. So I have a couple narratives I'm working on, and I'm at this part of the story because we're definitely going to the Farallon story underneath Oregon and Northern California. I know we're going there, and I'm excited to share that with everybody, and I've got new thoughts there as well, as I think I'm trying to piece this together. But before we get too far along, I'm confused a little bit about the birth of the Cascades up here in Washington, which Jeff Tepper keeps mentioning goes back to 46 million years ago. And I don't know anything about the Southern Cascades. From your papers, it seems like the Southern Cascades are not starting at 46 million years ago, the ancestral Cascades in southern Oregon and Northern California. When do you start the Cascade volcanic arc south of Portland? Or even further south?
Well, I have no direct information on that, but from what I've read, there may be some very few ages, maybe around 40.
Okay.
But they're sparse, and I'm not sure what the quality of the ages are. But it seems to me that the data is pointing to the fact the Southern Cascades are a little bit younger than they are in the north. Yeah.
Well, what I'm driving at is the last moment of Karin Siglock's episode, which was the previous one to this one. There was a question in the live chat from Sky Cooley saying, did the Yellowstone Hot Spot cross the trench, implying that we had already started the Cascade volcanic arc. We already had a subducting ocean plate, whatever plate that was, and did the Yellowstone mantle plume like blow right through that whole thing? And you might have a visual for us, but what are your general thoughts about that? When we have North America slipping over the hot spot, that's one thing, but if we have a subducting plate in the middle of all of that blows my mind, and I'm not sure what to visualize. Any thoughts there?
So my thoughts are highly influenced by Gene Humphreys.
Okay.
And his greater Silesia, that was that collided and continued underneath the embayment, the Columbia embayment.
Okay.
And then is also related perhaps to the vertical slab that you would point out, from the tomography.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah.
But I think there's no evidence of that occurring farther south. So the idea would have to be that there's less influence, of course, of that major accretionary event in the area where the Cascades was first began, even though the Cascades appear to be a little bit younger there. I'm still struggling with those concepts myself. So
yeah, just workshopping a little idea here. I'm trying to think about the long life of the Yellowstone Hot Spot. Whether we started at 56 is another discussion. We don't need to go earlier than that. But if we start the life of this Yellowstone mantle plume at a spreading ridge, and then does it leave a spreading ridge and it's in an ocean plate, or it's on a spreading ridge the whole time? And then what's the next chapter of this hotspot's life? Is it dealing with a trench somehow? And then is it eventually getting away from that subducting plate, which we eventually do, I guess, by the time we get to northern Nevada? But that's, I think, where we're headed with your visuals, that you have a mantle plume that has a big cookie sheet over the top of it, deflecting it from the surface. I'm kind of stealing your story, but those first, that earliest days between 56 and 42, sounds like you're still trying to get a clear visual yourself. And maybe nobody has it totally figured out, but that's a crucial part of the story from my point of view, because I'm just so interested in the birth of the Cascade volcanic arc up in my neck of the woods.
So I think the way Ray has it is we had the collision of Silesia, and that had to have occurred, that if there was any subduction in the southern portion, I suppose there would have to be some sort of subduction in order to have the collision event.
Right.
But then the trench itself then flipped over to the western side of Silesia.
Right.
And so if the hotspot's going to enter a trench, that's where the trench would have been. And the idea is, because all the workers on the Silesia terrain have mapped out what was called the Tillamook episode of volcanism, which was the last little pulse, which occurred above a Silesia that's now subaerially exposed. So there actually appear to be post-accretionary lavas that have more of a plume signature than the larger Silesia terrain. So that's considered, I think, perhaps as maybe when the hotspot first entered, or I don't know how to phrase it otherwise,
right.
Entered the trench. So.
Right. Okay. Very helpful. Thank you. You got some water handy? You got a frog in your throat? You want to have? We can do a little cheers here. Sure. Lubricate the old. Here we go. Here's
cheers.
To you, Vic. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to those slides, and we'll just do a bit more of that. I hope I didn't screw you up too much, but I love getting two heads on screen occasionally and just kind of mixing it up. Thank you. We're right back. Nice.
Absolutely. Okay, so there it is. See, the segues are working perfectly, right?
They are. Yeah.
Of course, this is a cartoon. I mean, who knows? What it's really like.
No, I love it. I love it.
but here's Silesia, and then the Tillamook, which is part Silesia, but the youngest subbarely exposed lavas are right here.
Huh.
And because it has such a better, I should say, uh, chemical signature, the plume is likely the feeder. And at this point, was, began this event of being shielded by the overriding plate.
Hmm. Hmm.
So again, this is you have to take it with a grain of salt, but this is
Sure.
sort of the idea of the model.
Mm-hmm.
So then, I sort of put this together as what could happen over time along
Ah,
the hotspot
great.
track. We first had a plume with what we can call a relatively small plume head. I also want to, in terms of terminology, I should say that mantle plume heads are thought to produce flood basalt provinces,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
these are the starting plume heads when it first arrived.
Hmm.
Um, but that, in reality, is what produced the Silesia terrain offshore,
Yeah.
right? That's the
Yeah.
true plume head. So the starting plume head was around 56 million years ago.
Huh.
But this is an unusual situation for a plume to be shielded, and if that's true, we still have flux from the plume tail that's feeding into the head.
Yeah.
So over time, the head's going to grow, as you can see here, beneath the shielded plume. And
Huh.
this gives us enough source to produce the Columbia River flood basalts. Uh, but the flood basalts in our part of the world, they're nicely exposed, but they're actually by far the smallest flood basalt that's on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not really typical of a plume head. So you can consider it sort of a secondary plume head. At any rate, it was shielded until it broke through, and I say broke through in, I don't know, in quotes,
Yeah.
um, to generate the Columbia flood basalts, and you can see that happening here. So we go from a hotspot, oceanic hotspot track to a shielded hotspot track, and eventually to a continental hotspot track, well ensconced underneath the North American plate that's being fed by the hot plume tail, and this would be the Snake River Plain hotspot track.
Great
So
figure. Great figure.
hotspot track, flood
Yeah.
basalt province, shielded plume.
What do you make of the difference? Back to that slide, please.
Sure.
What do you make of the spacing between those red circles on your track? Why is it so close between 30 and 20 and so spread out between 20 and 10, for
So,
instance?
so this isn't random. It's actually related directly to the Matthews et al. Plate motion. So there
Mm-hmm.
was something here that caused a different rate between the two.
Oh, that's real? That the North American plate was slower between 30 and 20?
Appears to be, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's new. Never heard that
This
before.
this track, I think Ray constructed this with G plates,
Uh huh.
using the plate motion trend. So I actually asked him the same question,
Huh.
and that's the answer I got.
Okay. All right. Hey, that's all you can do. Sometimes you just get your trusted sources and go with it. Now, I'm also looking at this with full attention, and yet another part of my brain is thinking about what's going on with the Washington Cascades during this time. For instance, there's this incredibly thick Ohanapakash formation between 32 and 28 million years ago that's got like 15,000 vertical feet of volcaniclastic stuff going into some sort of shallow ocean basin or something. I have no idea what to do with that. Trying to think about what's going on further south. That's just a comment. Like I'm trying to grapple with regional tectonics using some of these narratives I've found in the Cascades, and it's not easy, or at least it's brand new to me. That's for sure.
I'll
Um,
as we go through these slides, I'll give you another narrative to consider just to make it more difficult for you.
Bring it on. I love it. I love it. Good. All right.
Okay.
Great.
So this is just, shaded relief map that shows the same thing as the previous one, but it has some other images here. I just wanted to make sure to point out the Columbia basalts
Yeah.
here that extend into the Steens mountain region, making that connection with the hotspot track, the Adakite belt, but also the source area for the Columbia River basalts. All
Yeah.
the dikes and vents are associated with this gray area um, in here, just to keep people in mind. And the main concentration for the flood basalts was the Chief Joseph Dyke Swarm up in here, the Monument Dyke Swarm that produced the Picture Gorge basalts, and the Steens Dyke Swarm here at Steens Mountain.
Did Hooper suggest you guys go to Southeast Oregon? Did he have a hunch there were some dikes down there, or why did he send you down there, or suggest you to go down there?
He did. In fact, he himself started mapping in the Moyer Gorge, and he had
Uh,
a graduate student at the time, Ben Binger, and they started to see some evidence there that the Imnaha basalt, which had been the oldest unit in the Columbia basalt, there's chemical lavas in the Moyer Gorge that fit that criteria of Imnaha basalt, but they appeared to be sitting on top of another type of basalt without a real unconformity between the two that he thought would probably be Steens.
oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's just, I want to point out the Yellowstone Hot Spot track, the timeline here and the color coding and what that actually means.
Mm-hmm.
The Adakite erupted from 30 to 20 MA. And in addition to the Adakite, all throughout this portion of what we refer to as the back arc area of the Cascades is an area of high potassium calc-alkaline volcanism,
Mm-hmm.
which indicates that it's a very similar source to the Cascades themselves.
Mm.
A hydrated mantle source. Then there was a hiatus of about 3 to 5 million years, and then began the Columbia River basalts that erupted from a dry mantle source. So you have these
Mm-hmm.
two separate mantle sources, one being a wet source, the other being very dry, with a hiatus in between.
Interesting.
So that has to be explained.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings me to the Tepper and Clark paper. And here, to partly answer your question, Nick, you can see in blue here that they have cascade units greater than 40 MA.
Yeah.
And in the southern portion, there's a little bit right in here
Huh.
of that age.
Uh-huh.
And then sitting above that, they have Oligopleiocene arc that's in tan, I guess,
Yeah.
which is fairly narrow zone. But then you go down into Oregon and the zone gets much wider. And then they incorporated the rocks that Marty and I had been mapping, along with, I should say, Anita Grunder and her students,
Mm-hmm.
did a lot of mapping on these individual rock units. And what you see is a major change here, a geographic perturbation that spreads out in a bulge all the way to Idaho. In fact, some of these units are exposed here in Idaho, and then the Adakite belt is here. So, if the reason I like this map is because of the color coding.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it makes it look like the arc, is way over here, spreading out in this direction, which to me makes sense because it's a little bit different source because of the high potassium character of these rocks, but they're still so-called calc-alkaline in the character, which are arc-like. And we interpret this as the shielded plume.
I see.
And the way we do that is we look at the contact here. Do you recognize this area?
I sure do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. So this is Bear Rim. Many of you out there probably recognize this. And here we have the older 30 to 20 million year calc-alkaline rocks from a hydrated mantle source. And sitting on top of that is the 17 million year old tholeiitic Steens basalt with a 3 to 5 million year unconformity sitting above. So that's the hiatus that exists here.
Great photo.
So yeah, I love this area.
Hmm.
What I'm getting at is what's happening to the plume here and what's happening to the plate. Obreski et al. In their tomography back in 2010, where I think the first to suggest that the plate was broken up by the Yellowstone plume.
Huh.
And this is what their tomography shows looking north. This is the Yellowstone Hot Spot track. Um, what we see here is a subducting Juan de Fuca plate and the Gorda plate. And one of the things that's very telling here is that there's a termination of plate subduction here that's very shallow. And there's a big hole in the Farallon plate that separates the today's subducting plate from Farallon plate remnants over here. And this remnant F1 shows up very well in these cross sections by Schmatt and Humphreys, also published in 2010, which you see on the right-hand side. So this is the termination of the Gorda plate here and here, and the remnant of the Farallon plate that's now sunk down into the mantle transition zone right here, for about 350 kilometers down to, 900 kilometers depth, with a slab gap here that produces sort of an echelon pattern that you see over here in the Obreski's cartoon of what's actually happening. And this would be the hot spot. So the question is, what produced the hole? Is Obreski at all correct? Is the hole really there? The tomography suggests it, but a lot of seismologists originally suggested that it was some sort of artifact that's producing the hole and it wasn't real. But I think most people see it as a real hole, and the question is what produced it. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to, being a geologist that likes to put their hands on rocks in the field, I wanted to bring the edge of the Farallon plate as it is today up to the surface. So this is a gross representation or estimate of where the plates are. So here you see the termination of the current subducting plate.
Okay.
Right in here. This is more or less eyeballed, so it's not, highly accurate. And here is the slab gap SG1 that we see right here. And then here is the Farallon plate remnant. Here's the slab curtain of Humphreys et al., which swings around to the north. So all this is the whole, and you have little remnants in here of relatively cold, high velocity mantle, which could be remnants of the Farallon plate or delaminated crust like this R3. Gene thinks that's, and he's probably right, delaminated crust. But the other thing I wanted to put on this hole are the dike swarms for the Clumber basalt.
Yes.
And you can see that they all fall within the hole. So this would be consistent, perhaps, with creation of the hole, destruction of the plate under the influence of a plume arrival. And it also, it swings around and, is pretty well conforms with the orientation of the eastern Snake River hotspot track.
Sure.
So to the north, this is from Humphreys et al. And you can see the slab curtain here, the vertical trail, and here it is in cross section.
Yeah.
Going down to 600 kilometers or thereabouts. Here's the termination of the current Juan de Fuca plate. So that would be about right in here, swinging around. So that also forms the northern portion of the hole. So let's see where we are now. Now that termination is shallow enough to think that it could be the result of something happened about 17 million years ago.
Oh, I see.
So this would be our interpretation of this. So eventually what would happen in our model is the plume head would grow over time. And I should say that this model is actually built on a geology article, the Journal of Geology, by Coble and Mahood, who suggested this idea first. It's not original from us, But the uplift, plumes are very weak, so it's kind of difficult to envision a model where the plume's going to be strong enough to break through a slab, which is actually much stronger. But they have tremendous buoyancy because they're hot, and the ability to actually uplift slabs. So here we uplift the slab, changing the subducting character, and in doing so, I don't know. Let me go back here a little bit. I might have. Oh yeah, here's this cross section before what took place for. So as it's uplifting, it's releasing water out of the oceanic crust into the mantle wedge, and that's triggering calc-alkaline volcanism in the back arc area, behind the Cascades. So the
Mm-hmm.
Cascades are active in the southern portion, but what explains this portion is the uplift and release of water into the mantle wedge. So it's a combination of decompression as it's being uplifted, but also additional heat supplied by the thermal energy of the plume itself. So that's the broad area of calc-alkaline volcanism. And then the Adacites, if they indeed are the result of melting of the crust, either the crust has to be broken to allow some sort of contact, or thin enough so that the thermal energy can induce melting of the oceanic crust. And for non-petrologists, the oceanic crust has a much lower melting temperature than the mantle does, so it's a lot easier to melt the crust if you can provide enough thermal energy to it. So, so that's kind of the idea here. So the other problem, if it is a problem, I think it will be noted that according to the Matthews et al. Hotspot track, the plume should be here,
Hmm.
and therefore it's not under the slab hole, nor is it sitting directly underneath the main dike swarms, Chief Joseph, Monument, Steens
Right.
dike swarms,
Right.
but rather it's underneath the cratonic crust. The 706 line that many of us are familiar with comes right through here, separating relatively thin lithosphere of the accreted terrains with a thicker lithosphere. So it's more continental in character. So the model here is that as you start to uplift the slab, the head is going to grow, and it's going to actually slide up the inclined plane, to the west.
Hmm.
So it's sort of asymmetric here over the plume tail.
Hmm.
This was also in Coble and Mahood's model as well. The hottest part of the tail or of the plume head is going to be directly above the tail. So we may have breakout here. Um, and then that could actually continue to move upward, to the west when it hits the thicker to thinner lithosphere boundary up here. So it's buoyancy flow from the plume tail. We think that that's likely, but we also think it's likely we have another breakout here in the distal portion of the plume head that's feeding the Steens basalts, but also the monument mountain basalts. And the reason for this, without getting into too much detail, is that we actually believe there's two stages in the Columbia basalt eruption. The first stage, slightly earlier, was eruption up over the distal portion of the plume head,
Huh.
Steens Mountain and Steens basalt. And this is partly based on the age dates that we have, both argon dates, but also uranium, lead, zircon dates on intermittent ash that date the earliest rocks around 17 million years ago. And then the oldest rocks in the Chief Joseph's dike swarm, which produce about 85% of the Columbia basalts, the oldest of those rocks are about 16.6 million years in Imnaha basalt, and this created about 85% of the province, which is important to realize. So the chemistry tells us that that this is being sourced, Steens is being sourced from the distal plume head and the Naha basalt, uh, and the evolution of the remaining units actually begin with a source here closer to the proximal end of the plume head.
Hmm.
So that's why I want to show these picture images. So any thoughts on that, Nick, that you want to discuss, or?
Well, you've always had a great visual sense. So going back 20 years, I think I would email you occasionally and say, I saw a talk you gave, Vic. I just love those diagrams, those figures, and you were always so generous. So thanks. These are pleasing figures just from a nostalgia point of view for me, because you've done such a nice job that way. Yeah, my main thought is that, well, two things maybe, and then viewers, we're coming to you momentarily. I don't know how many more slides you've got, Vic. Do you feel like you've got a bunch more that you want to share, or is this kind of where we are?
Not a bunch. I do have maybe a couple of more, but that'll be it.
Okay, well, my general thoughts are, well, one, I'm back to this narrative again. Like, how many different experiences did that Yellowstone Hot Spot have? It's out in the water at a spreading ridge, then it's dealing with the margin, then it's dealing with the trench, then it's dealing with exotic terrain material, then it's shielded by the subducting Farallon plate, then before you know it, it's crossing underneath a craton. I mean, that's in itself kind of fascinating compared to like the Hawaiian hotspot or something else where it's kind of a boring life out there dealing with, it seems like, the same kind of crust and the same kind of story. So I like that aspect of it, and your figures are helping me see that. I guess the other thought is that it feels like in the Cascades of Washington between 30 and 20 million years ago, things are going wild with all these volcanic centers that Paul Hammond and Don Swanson and others were mapping. Do you have any general thoughts about this story and what's going on in the Cascade Volcanic Arc while all this stuff is going on further inland, even 17 million years ago? Is there a complete lull in the Cascades during a lot of this drama, do you think?
I've asked the same question to myself, but in some ways, I only have a certain amount of brain power, and I'm not sure how much more information I can put together. So,
yeah.
so in some ways, I like to stay away from. You end up, really. I think I'm relating enough as I can.
Yes.
Really centric to the formation of the Columbia basalts. But I do want to comment on your growing personal relationship with the Yellowstone plume.
Beautiful.
Because I've learned to sort of feel the same way. And you often, not often, but every once in a while, you read papers that have come from people that don't like to think about plume so much, and they talk about the irrelevancy of the Yellowstone plume and it's how weak it is. And, we think that it's the opposite and has been for a long time. It's a very robust feature and and still is,
Yeah.
Yeah. So shall I go on, or?
Let's do a final few slides, and then I think we're going straight to the viewers. I'm sure they're going to have a bunch. They're loving this. I'm seeing a lot of scrolling live comments where they're very enthusiastic about what you're doing. So yeah, just a handful more, Vic, if you don't mind.
Okay, so just very quickly, one thing I want you to notice is the orientation of the Steens dikes goes all the way down here into northern Idaho. And it occurs right in the middle of the slab gap. Now, the question is, in our mind, did the monument swarm and the Steens swarm, do they overlie a fracture that occurred in the Farallon slab that would cause that termination and creation of the slab hole?
Oh,
so I'm going to just concentrate in this area right down here. Now, you may think that since this is the edge of the slab, that it's been moving in the relative sense to the east as the North American plate has moved over the last 17 million years to the west, right? But in reality, we don't see any evidence of that. And the reason is because that shallow termination here has more than kept pace itself by moving off to the west due to rollback,
Hmm.
slab rollback. So
Hmm.
here you can see how we've indicated this in this direction. So I'll come to that. But one other thing I just wanted to mention is that it's not the plume that's breaking up the slab
Okay.
so much. It kind of looks like it here. The slab will be thermomechanically, working on the underbelly of the plate. But what's causing the breakup on the western side and the eastern side is subduction. So we have continued subduction here
Yeah.
and here, and that's
Yeah.
why the fractures are occurring on the east and west side
Huh.
of the plume as the plume continues to uplift, the center portion of it. So if we just come back down here into this area of California and northwestern Nevada,
Mm-hmm.
here you see the Steens Dike system. And Marty and I spent quite a bit of time looking at what's happening here because we started to get ages back from Bob Duncan and Dave Kimbrough on a number of different rocks here. And what we found is that the oldest rocks here of this calc-alkaline area of volcanic activity, in other words, arc activity, sits on top of the Steens stratigraphic, not stratigraphically, but uh, in time. We don't see a direct connection, but the oldest rocks of Steens basalts are about 17 million years. The beginning or initiation of this period of calc-alkaline volcanism is 17 million years.
Hmm.
And then it migrates off in this direction to the west in a pretty consistent pattern all the way to Mount Shasta and Mount Lassen that we have
Wow.
over
Wow.
here today.
Yeah, that's new.
And the ages here, you can see ages based on longitude. And I mean, they're somewhat spread out here with some big anomalies, but there's a pretty consistent line here of around 8 kilometers per million years of rollback. So I think if the edge of the plate would have been over here, but it's right along the Steens trend, but it's migrated off in this direction due to rollback, which would indicate to us that the beginning fracture here that produces that in echelon character um, is a product of original fracture right here,
Yeah.
and then roll back to produce 150 kilometer gap, between this and the remnant of the Farallon slab over here. So I think that it will be my last slide. Yep,
Okay.
that should be
Well,
it.
well, that sounds eerily familiar to Jeff Tepper up in northeastern Washington, breaking
Mhm.
the slab, rolling the thing back, having an age progression east to west, but of course back to 52 to 44 as opposed to so much younger there. But that's kind of a cool little motif coming back in the series here. Did you borrow that idea of who were the first people talking about breaking a slab and rolling it back? Just in general.
Well, can I go back another slide?
Yeah, yeah.
So let's see. So let's go back to, since we're talking about uh, Tepper and Clark, just going back here. This area, people weren't aware that this has that signature. Now, people earlier, particularly Colgan and others up here
Uh-huh.
in the Warner Range, noted that they have a continuation of what's called the ancestral Cascades art down here, but that termination stopped right at the border,
Huh.
and that's why Colgan and all put this slab tear in the Farallon plate, because the Cascades then begin over here in his mind. But
Mm-hmm.
now we think that this material is the same as the ancestral Cascades
Hmm.
that are down here. So we see the rollback over here as well.
Hmm.
We just kind of moved it up a little bit, and it's consistent with what we didn't know is the age, that initiation age of
Yeah.
17 million years being the same as the Steens basalt, indicate that it's likely the fracture induced both of those, at the time.
Well, that's pretty cool. That's the big moment from the last 15 minutes for me, that you've got that 17 million year date as a pretty major date with things both to the north and south of that
And it's
little
not
gap
just one
there.
one date. We have it. It's actually about 16.7, but
Okay,
rounded off.
right,
It's about the same.
right. Well, you have experience teaching. That is clear. So just laying that out in such a natural and easy to follow manner, appreciated, I'm sure, by everybody. I can feel that even without seeing the live chat. So let's go ahead. Viewers, if you're new to us, we take a few extra minutes. Vic, do you have another 15 minutes?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So viewers, what we do in this on this channel is we use the caps lock or the uppercase, and that signifies that that's a question. And I'm just going to kind of glance at the live chat, and if Vic wants to go back to a figure to answer a question, that's fine. But otherwise, it can just be a bunch of quick questions coming at Vic, and he'll do the best to answer whatever you want to ask about. And this works out beautifully with this series, so I appreciate this. North Scotty Nerd asks, why are the flood basalts concentrated to the north of the Yellowstone Hot Spot? Is that true? Why do we see the flood basalts generally to the north of this hot spot track?
So it is true, and it all relates to the Chief Joseph Dyke Swarm. Now the question is why? I mean, why should we be producing such a high volume there as opposed to not on the hot spot itself? It's something I didn't talk about, but we do have an idea about this, and I'm currently writing a paper with John Wolfe that may, in our view, help explain that. What we believe happened is this is going to sound wild, perhaps, without the supporting data. I'll just throw it out there
Why
anyway.
not? Why not?
Is that when the plume tail actually became well involved was at that time when the Chief Joseph Dyke Swarm began. But we believe what happened is that plume material was now channelized to the northwest beneath the western Snake River Plain, and it ponded in at the base of the lithosphere to produce an underplate zone, but then it also assimilated material from the Idaho batholith, as the melt was also channelized in the same place where we see a number of different intrusions that define the geophysical signature of the western Snake River Plain. At any rate, then all that was drained up to the north, as dikes that migrated rapidly to the north into Chief Joseph Dyke Swarm. So it's really kind of a funnel of activity to the north into the Dyke Swarm.
Excellent. John Nash asks, are the Crooked River caldera, Wildcat, and Tower Mountain calderas part of this Yellowstone hotspot trend?
Excellent question. I don't know the answer to that. They seem to be well north of where we would put the hotspot track. But I think there's something else going on that I don't have an answer to. Others have speculated. I'm not sure.
Perfectly fine answer. Thank you. Regine in France asks, now that Yellowstone hotspot is under the thick craton, is it forming another plume head? And when will it be under the Atlantic?
Another good question. Yes, it likely is ponding underneath the North American lithosphere to some extent, and then what's happening is melts are largely focused over the actual tail. What's happening is the North American plate is actually dragging plume material off to the northwest. Yeah. And we see this in Hawaii and in other places. So it's really asymmetric and spread out to the northwest along the hotspot track. Mm-hmm. And the melts of basalt are rising into the crust, melting crust to some extent to produce rhyolitic eruptions that we see in Yellowstone. And the question is, I mean, as the lithosphere gets thicker, what effect is that going to have? This is all speculation, right, from the future onward. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, you're going to have to wait a while, I think, Regine, for it to show up in the Atlantic. Uh, Plenty of really good questions here. Ron, what is the relationship, if any, between this and the more recent high lava plains volcanism of Central Oregon?
Okay, that's your viewers have excellent questions actually. So this is something that's been a little bit controversial, and different people have different opinions. So I can't go through all the models.
Right.
You should get Anita Grunder on, and
Yeah.
Maureen Long would be another one to talk about, from the geophysical standpoint. But in my view, it's it's also a product of channelized flow. And wrote a paper in geology a few years ago that kind of explains how you can see in the tomography, literally see the channel that moves through the high lava plains,
Hmm.
and it's associated with Quaternary age volcanoes that pop out along the channel itself.
Hmm.
So I think it's still plume material that's moving to the west. What often happens, I don't want to get carried away with this, but
Yeah.
what actually happens is the source for these materials get more and more diluted by ambient mantle as you go farther and farther away from the plume. And therefore, the signature is often said, well, that's not a plume signature.
Hmm.
But if you look really closely, it's a mixed signature with a plume component.
Hmm. Bobby wonders, the Adakite, is it a signature of the plume or the slab?
The slab.
The
Signature is
slab.
the slab. Yeah.
Yeah, I struggled for more than a year with Adakites, and Tepper's trying to help me, and I think he's getting impatient at this point. It's like, look, you tear a slab, you're burning the edge of the subducted. I'm still working on it, but I'm getting there, I think. But you're saying the Adakites in general are still kind of controversial. Is that what you said earlier today?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people get upset with the whole idea of Adakites because they think the signature is immediately interpreted as melting of oceanic crust, and other
Mm.
people have seen that there are other ways. You can't restrict it in that fashion. It appears to be the case at the type area, but you can't necessarily say that every place you see that signature means you're melting oceanic crust.
Right. Let's do a few more. Ben says, why wasn't the leading eastern edge of the Farallon uplifted as it moved over the Yellowstone Hot Spot? Why wasn't the leading eastern edge of the Farallon uplifted as it moved over the hot spot?
Well, the leading, well, it probably was, assuming there was a leading edge. I think that trying to visualize what's actually happening at the moment that it enters the trench is really difficult. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it would be very, very complicated geology going on, subsurface geology. Uh, but yeah, if the plume's there, anything would be affected by the thermal buoyancy of it. So
Joe Slick Live wonders, is the basin and range spreading related to the rollback? It seems to be a coincidence or not?
so uh, another good question. I don't think it's related to the rollback, but basin range spreading in general, which of course is over a much wider area than
Right.
just the area of the rollback. Interestingly enough, was initiated at the same time as the Columbia basalts.
Hmm.
This is a whole nother topic, and I hope Nick has a show on it sometime. Just that alone,
Yeah, that would
because
do it.
because in my view, and this is probably I've probably had more people disagree with this anywhere than anything, is that we have to consider that the plume was actually a trigger for basin range extension, as opposed to the other way around.
Huh.
I mean, some people have argued that it's the extension that produced the Columbia basalt volcanism, which doesn't make any sense when you look, in my view, uh, when you look at how much extension is where the dikes forms are. It's
Hmm.
minimal. I think all those dikes are forcible in injection. So we have the greatest amount of volcanism in the area of least extension, but in the basin range we have the greatest amount of extension with very little volcanism.
Well,
Anyway,
since
I think that's a little bee in my bonnet from that question. So I appreciate the question, but I don't want to get carried away with the answer.
Well, I'm adding to my intimate relationship with the Yellowstone Hot Spot, my close personal friend now. Like, I'm starting to see, I think, right now that if we go back to the history of the concept of the Yellowstone Hot Spot, it's originally tied to the Snake River Plain only. That's such an obvious signature. Then it starts getting involved in the history of the flood basalts of eastern Washington. Then it's being sent back further in time, and now we're talking about the Yellowstone mantle plume tied to Siletzia. Now you're talking about throwing the Basin Range in. So this is becoming a bigger and bigger story with the entire Western North America geology scene. This is like one of the players that we didn't see maybe a generation ago.
So Nick, I appreciate those thoughts, and I think you're right. But what I would say, no matter what the answer is, the timing is worth investigating. And
Yeah,
the people, it's all tectonics, which is great, but you can't ignore what the plume is doing, where it is, and what's happening at that time outside the tectonics.
yeah. Well, you're so good at this. I want to do a few more, and these questions continue to be top-notch this morning. Sky Cooley, how does the thickness of the Columbia River basalts in eastern Washington compare to the total thickness of the lavas erupted in Oregon?
So they are much thicker. I shouldn't say much. I mean, Steens is pretty thick. I mean, at its thickest, it would be about 1,000 meters. But the Columbia basalts are thicker in eastern Oregon.
Thicker in Washington, or Oregon?
Sorry, in Washington, particularly in the center of the Columbia Basin. And Steve Rydell could talk about that. But the overall total thickness, I think, is estimated, I don't know, 5 kilometers or something like that.
I don't know what Sky's driving at there. Like, if they're not quite as thick in Oregon, why is that important? Does that tell you something about pre-17 million year old geography or geology or something? Or I'm just anticipating what Sky might be talking about. Wouldn't you expect the basalts to be thicker in Oregon since we're getting closer to the source, quote unquote?
So there is an evolving basoning that's happening in Washington at the same time as the basalts, and that basin, the Columbia Basin, is actually subsiding, and perhaps eastern, Idaho border areas may be uplifting at the same time as the basalts are erupting.
Yeah, Gene.
We see evidence of that in the stratigraphy. So.
You do.
Yeah.
And Gene Humphreys had some weird thing, some signature under Pascal Basin or something that he kept talking about. I'm not bright enough to remember that right now, but okay. 3 more and we're done. Leslie in Boston. Snake River Plain is actually an old rift? Yes or no?
I'm not that familiar with the pre-geology, before basalts and bimodal eruption there, so I better not comment on that.
Very good. Chris says, how much compressional force did the plate apply before the slab break, and how much was the force reduced after breaking?
I don't think I can comment on that either. I don't have any information, to comment.
Very good. Well, we got to end on a good one now. We can't add. You're phoning a friend now, Vic. You're doing all sorts of stuff. We got to get a couple in your wheelhouse before we quit. You're so good. I'm going way back. I missed a bunch of good ones here. Does this have, Stephen asked, does this have anything to do with the rotation of the surface in the far northwest? I don't know if he's talking about the clockwise rotation in general in the Pacific Northwest, but maybe that's how we finish. Can we come back to the significance and the role of the clockwise rotation with this whole story? Like, how much are we... You can take that any way you want, Vic. The clockwise rotation appears to be not only a crowd favorite. People just love that concept of this graceful, beautiful 1 degree of rotation every million years in the last 50 million years, according to Ray. But how important is that rotation with our topic from you today?
So to me, I mean, the one thing I'd like to focus on that often isn't focused on is the Chief Joseph Dike Swarm.
Okay.
So here we have by far the greatest volume of the Clermont River basalt being produced, but it's being produced in a place that's very, very close to the polar rotation, which means that the extension there is very minimal.
Yeah.
There's just not enough extension there to extend the crust to produce the fractures that allow all those dikes to rise up. And that's one of many reasons that I and others, think that those dikes are a product of forceful dike injection and not the result of crustal extension.
That's big, and I'm going to chew on that one. That's a great way to finish. I'd never really put those things together. We're having the most voluminous basalts coming out at exactly the wrong place if you just simply like to extend the crust to make room for those lavas to come out. Wow. Fun. Okay, I think that's plenty. I appreciate your time this morning. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we quit here with any of the prior episodes, or we feel like we covered what you wanted to talk about this morning, Vic?
I have nothing to add in that regard, but I do want to say one last thing. Is I want to thank you for doing these series because I know I'm just one of many, many people that enjoy listening to them. So thanks much.
Well, thank you for saying that, and thank you so much for joining us today. Hey, enjoy yourself at GSA next week, and we'll catch up with you again down the road, I hope. Thank you for a great appearance today.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop this. Well, Vic beat me to it. Let's get off of it then. That was Dr. Vic Camp from San Diego State University, longtime professor, still teaching. He's really good. Let's I guess we'll just finish verbally here. Thank you for being part of these. We had a surprisingly large live crowd here on a Friday morning without a whole lot of fanfare and buildup. It's been almost a week since I talked with Karin. I guess that's what I want to say before we quit. No, I want to say a couple things. I don't know if this is the end of the Idaho series or not. It might very well be. Couple reasons. I need to take a break from this to recharge my batteries before we start the Cascade Volcanoes A to Z Livestream series, which will be starting in early November. And I will be doing a short video with all the dates that I have set up now. Pretty sure about all these dates coming in the next year. I just want to communicate all those dates. So I need to take a break just to, school starting next week here, and I need to put a lot of my energy into that. But another reason this might be the last episode in this series is that I don't really know where to go. I guess I do want to say it. I thoroughly enjoyed today. I thoroughly enjoyed Karin Siglock last time and Mike Eddy before that. I've enjoyed each of these, but it felt like the first 8 or 9 episodes, a big narrative was emerging, at least from my point of view. I don't know about yours. And it was all kind of feeling about, I think I had something figured out for what I wanted to do. And Basil was the first outside of the box person. And then Mike was kind of a surprising outside of the box person, I guess. And then Carm was really outside the box. And so I loved those episodes, but now I don't think I know what to do. And you're like, I don't know, what am I talking about? I'm talking about how to synthesize these 11 episodes, or maybe a 12th if I get somebody on in the next 2 weeks. But it's my job now to take all these great episodes, and I say great just because these guests were so strong and had such good, eloquent ways to explain their thinking. And how do I put it together? Because clearly there was major disagreement. In a nice vibe way. It wasn't angry or anything, but that's really what I'm trying to do here with this series without really being super vocal about it. It's just a new way to show how science is operating. And there's a lot of conflict as science is happening. So I'm literally pausing right now because I don't know if I should say this is the end of the Idaho series and thanks everybody and see you in November. Maybe I won't do any live streams between now and November. Or maybe, okay, that's how we're going to finish. If you've enjoyed the Idaho series and you feel like there is an obvious episode 12, what should it be? Maybe you and your suggestions in the live comments, or if you're watching this in replay and you're still with us at the end of this hour-and-a-half episode, 2-hour episode, leave a comment down below. Should this be the end of the Idaho series, or is there an obvious next guest or two that should take us in a direction that you think should be happening? And to help you, I guess, let me remind you what I was doing at the beginning of this live stream series, this Idaho geology miniseries, and maybe that will jog your ideas about if you feel like we've done what I was hoping to do or not. Well, what I wanted to do originally was just ask, was there a volcanic arc in Idaho that was a earlier version of the Cascade volcanic arc? That was the simple goal. And I got a resounding no for that. And then I wanted to expand on Jeff Tepper's model of breaking the Farallon plate twice and having a rolled back of the Farallon plate in northeastern Washington between 52 and 44 million, 52 to 46 million years ago, which sets up beautifully the birth of the Cascade volcanic arc. That's definitely how we're starting the alphabet this November. But talking to Tepper himself and then others, where I was trying to extend Tepper's story or try Tepper's story from somebody else who had different expertise, that's what got us to talking to all these different tomographers. And then we got out to the Pacific Ocean and started talking about which plate was where at different times. And then the last two episodes, the most recent two episodes, which have almost identical titles, by the way, we started throwing in this major monkey wrench, which is the Yellowstone mantle plume, which, as we learned from Vic today, is more than just a sideshow. Maybe the Yellowstone mantle plume is the show. More important, for all we know, we'll do some stuff this winter with the cat. Okay, now I'm excited. For all we know, this winter, we're going to be realizing that the Yellowstone mantle plume has a major signature in the frickin' Cascade volcanic arc. Daddy's excited. I don't know what that is, but if we keep, if we keep taking things from the Pacific Northwest Geology 101 textbook and going, yeah, maybe that's tied to the Yellowstone mantle plume somehow. So let's see it. Yeah, maybe that's part of Yellowstone Hot Spot. Basin and Range, Vic. Well, maybe that's triggered by the Yellowstone Hot Spot. Well, maybe before we know it this winter, maybe that's one major theme. Instead of the Yellowstone mantle, I'm clearly riffing now. Instead of the Yellowstone mantle plume just simply innocently passing through the Cascade Volcanic Arc unnoticed, maybe there are major stories of a major mantle plume effing up the Cascade Volcanic Arc from its birth until 25 million years ago. I have no idea what I'm talking about right now, but we can just, take one of the major stories that I learned from Vic today. How much will the Yellowstone mantle plume figure into our narratives this winter? And you're like, that's a really stupid question. Obviously not much at all. The thing was down in California, by the way. What's that got to do with Rainier? I am going back 46 million years ago in Rainier Park. If you've been watching the field videos, there's another one I'm going to post this afternoon from Paradise Road. So Vic wasn't that interested, understandably, in commenting on Washington Cascades during his expertise south of there. But I kept thinking, what's going on in the Washington Cascades during all this stuff happening down south? It's not that far away. All right, this one might not age very well. We'll get to some major narratives this winter, and this little thing at the end is like, well, that was clearly misguided. Is it misguided or not? A toast to you. Here's to you for joining us today. Thank you. Here's to Vic Camp. Thank you for your time today, Vic. Hope you enjoyed this replay and you see all these nice comments scrolling by. I'm sure they're nice comments. They're always nice comments. They're never negative. We don't need a moderator. Here's to you, your family and your friends and your people in your world. I hope everything's going well, sincerely. That's it today. When will I see you next live? It might be November. Or it might be tomorrow. I don't know. We'll see. All right. Thank you, everybody. I love you and goodbye from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. That was harder than it needed to be. Goodbye. End stream.